The first mistake the security team made was thinking the danger would come through the front door. The second was believing the most powerful woman in the room was the safest one. Under the crystal chandeliers of Glasshaven Hall, Adrianne Vale smiled for cameras, shook hands with billionaires, and prepared to announce a deal that could change the future of global security. No one noticed the 4 catering staff moving without trays. No one questioned why the Northwest cameras blinked every 47 seconds. No one saw the bodyguards drift away from their post after a perfectly timed crash at the bar. No one except Grant Mercer, a widowed veteran father working a side security job just to keep his daughter's future alive. From the corner, his 15-year-old daughter Tessa whispered into his earpiece that something was wrong with the system. Then Grant saw it. 4 men closing in on Adrianne in a military box formation, one hand slipping beneath a burgundy vest, steel flashing under the golden lights. If he shouted, the room would explode into panic. If he waited, Adrianne would be dead before her guards turned around. So Grant moved. One man crashed through a dessert table. A knife spun across the marble. Guests screamed. Champagne shattered. And in less than 30 seconds, the quiet single dad everyone had overlooked became the only thing standing between a CEO and a professional assassination. But when Tessa checked the security logs afterward, she found something far worse than an attack. Someone had been inside the system for 3 weeks, watching Adrianne, studying her waiting. And now Grant and his daughter had ruined the plan. The question was no longer who wanted Adrianne Vale dead. The real question was, who was coming for them next? The autumn evening looked too beautiful to be dangerous. Glasshaven Hall rose above Harbor Row like a palace built from black marble, and mirrored glass, its windows glowing gold against the deepening blue of the city sky. Inside, chandeliers scattered light over polished floors, violins softened the sound of rich laughter, and waiters in burgundy vests moved between politicians, investors, philanthropists, and executives who believed money could keep chaos outside the door. Grant Mercer stood near the east entrance with his hands folded in front of him, dressed in a dark suit that felt tighter than any uniform he had ever worn in the military. He had once moved through deserts, ruined towns, and hostile territory as a force recon marine. But tonight his job was simpler. Watch the crowd, protect the exits, and get through one more security shift so he could pay the bills waiting on his kitchen table. Since his wife Mira died 5 years earlier, Grant's world had narrowed to 2 things: work and his daughter Tessa. He fixed cabinets by day, took security jobs by night, and measured every decision by whether it helped keep his 15-year-old girl safe. Tessa sat at a small table half hidden behind an ice sculpture shaped like a rising phoenix, wearing a navy dress Grant had ironed himself that afternoon. To anyone passing by, she looked like a quiet teenager bored by adult conversation. In reality, 3 screens glowed on the tablet in her lap as she studied Glasshaven Hall's security network like a puzzle begging to be solved. Tessa had inherited Mira's brilliance with systems and patterns, a gift that sometimes made Grant proud and afraid in equal measure. She could see what others missed, not because she tried to show off, but because the world seemed to speak to her in codes, rhythms, and tiny mistakes. "Dad," her voice whispered through the small earpiece hidden beneath Grant's collar. "The Northwest camera grid is lagging." Grant did not move his head. His eyes drifted casually toward the far corner of the ballroom where a service corridor led toward the kitchen and staff elevators. "How bad?" he murmured. "Bad enough to be intentional. It should refresh every 30 seconds, but it's cycling every 47. That creates a blind spot near the service door." Grant's jaw tightened. Most men would have dismissed it as a glitch. Grant had survived too many ambushes to ignore patterns that felt slightly wrong. Across the ballroom, Adrianne Vale stood beneath the largest chandelier, surrounded by board members, donors, and reporters hungry for photographs. She was the founder and CEO of Helios DataWorks, a company that guarded the digital walls of banks, governments, and global corporations. Her emerald gown caught the light whenever she turned. But what people noticed most was not her beauty. It was the calm authority in her face, the expression of a woman who had built an empire without asking anyone's permission. She had come to the gala to support the Horizon Foundation, but the private briefing Grant had received mentioned something larger. Adrianne was preparing to announce a merger with Argent Shield, a European cyber defense firm. If completed, the deal would make Helios one of the most powerful security companies in the world. That kind of power created enemies. Grant knew it, and from the tightness in Adrianne's smile, he suspected she knew it too. Her personal protection team stood nearby, led by Orrin Blake, a broad-shouldered man with a professional posture and sharp eyes. But tonight, Orrin and his men looked too comfortable. The room was beautiful, the guest list was controlled, and the building had more cameras than windows. Comfort was how good people made fatal mistakes. A sudden crash rang out near the bar. Dozens of heads turned as a waiter stumbled backward, broken glass glittering across the floor like ice. Orrin's attention shifted. So did the attention of Adrianne's second guard. It lasted only a few seconds, but seconds were exactly what professionals needed. Grant saw 4 catering staff step from the northwest service entrance. They wore the same burgundy vests as the waiters, but they carried no trays, no bottles, no folded napkins. Their shoulders were too squared, their pace too measured, their spacing too perfect. They did not scan the room like employees looking for tables. They moved like a unit closing on a target. Adrianne. Grant's pulse slowed instead of quickening, the old combat part of him taking control before fear could interfere. Tessa, he said quietly, already moving. Call building security. Tell them we have a threat approaching the center floor. Dad, what's happening? Now! The lead man's right hand slipped beneath his vest. A flash of steel caught the chandelier light. Grant had no time to shout. A warning would turn the ballroom into a stampede, and panic would give the attackers more bodies to hide behind. He cut through the edge of the crowd, his path straight and silent. 10 feet, 7, 5. The attacker's fingers closed around the handle of a knife. Grant hit him with his shoulder like a door coming off its hinges. The man crashed into a dessert table, sending porcelain fruit and chocolate mousse exploding across the marble. The knife spun under a chair. Screams tore through the music. Adrianne turned, her eyes widening as the other 3 men abandoned disguise and lunged. Grant caught the second attacker's wrist twisted hard and used his momentum to slam him into the third. The fourth was faster, trained, and ruthless. His fist came for Grant's throat, but Grant blocked with his forearm, felt pain shoot to his elbow, and drove a short strike into the man's ribs. Another blade appeared. Grant grabbed a silver serving tray from a nearby table and raised it just as the knife came down. Metal screamed against metal. He slammed the tray into the attacker's face, then stepped between Adrianne and the third man as the crowd scattered in every direction. Somewhere behind him, Orrin was shouting orders, finally aware that his perfect perimeter had already failed. Grant took a blow to the ribs, ignored the pain, and dropped the attacker to his knees with a wrist lock that ended the fight without killing him. The fourth man tried once more, feinting left before charging low. Grant barely moved in time. The punch caught his jaw and filled his mouth with the taste of blood, but he stayed standing. He had taken worse. He drove forward, swept the man's legs, and sent him crashing onto the marble hard enough to silence the nearest screams for half a second. Then it was over. 30 seconds after it began, 4 trained attackers lay groaning on the floor, while guests huddled behind tables and security swarmed too late. Grant stood in the middle of the wreckage, suit torn at the shoulder, breathing hard, one hand pressed against his aching ribs. Adrianne stared at him as if the room had changed shape around her. She had probably spent her life proving she did not need saving, and now a stranger with blood on his lip had become the only reason she was alive. "Are you hurt?" Grant asked. Adrianne shook her head, but her voice did not come. Tessa pushed through the panicked crowd and grabbed Grant's arm, pale but steady. "Dad, the logs don't match," she whispered. "The cameras recorded them entering, but the access system says no one used that door." Grant looked toward the service entrance where police sirens were beginning to wail outside. The fight had ended, but the danger had not. In a private lounge minutes later, as officers questioned witnesses and paramedics restrained the attackers, Tessa showed Grant, Adrianne, and Orrin the truth on her tablet. Someone had inserted a ghost protocol into the building's security system, a hidden command that allowed certain people to move through doors and cameras without triggering normal records. "This wasn't hacked tonight," Tessa said, her voice small but certain. "It's been here for 3 weeks." The room went silent. Adrianne's face hardened, not with fear, but with the cold realization that someone had been studying her long before the first knife appeared. Grant felt the same certainty settle in his stomach. This had not been an attack of opportunity. It had been patient, expensive, and personal. Adrianne turned to him then, no longer speaking as a shaken woman, but as a CEO who understood danger had entered her life through a door money could not lock. She asked Grant to help her find who had done this. Grant wanted to refuse. Every instinct as a father told him to take Tessa home, bolt the door, and stay as far from Adrianne Vale's enemies as possible. But Adrianne said the one thing he could not ignore. Whoever planned the attack now knew Grant had stopped it, and they knew Tessa had seen the code. By saving Adrianne, he had placed his daughter directly in the path of people powerful enough to buy silence, uniforms, mercenaries, and time. Grant looked at Tessa at the courage in her young face, at the intelligence that had already made her a threat to unseen enemies. Then he looked back at Adrianne. His quiet life was already gone. The only choice left was whether to wait for danger to come to his door or walk toward it first. "All right," he said at last, his voice low and controlled. "We help you, but we do this smart, and my daughter's safety is not negotiable." Outside the lounge, cameras flashed, guests whispered, and the city began turning one failed assassination into breaking news. Inside, Grant understood the truth no headline would capture. The men on the floor had only been the beginning. By the time dawn broke over the city, Grant Mercer understood that the attack at Glasshaven Hall had not ended when the last assailant hit the marble floor. It had only opened a door. He had spent enough years in uniform to know the difference between violence born from anger and violence designed by professionals, and what happened beneath those chandeliers had been planned with patience, money, and inside knowledge. The police called it an attempted assault. The reporters called it chaos at a charity gala. Grant called it reconnaissance that had turned into a failed extraction, and that thought kept him awake long after he drove Tessa back to their small apartment on the edge of Brookmere. Their home looked painfully ordinary when they stepped inside, 2 mugs drying beside the sink, a half-finished cabinet door leaning against the wall, Tessa's school books stacked beside a laptop that was far too advanced for any high school assignment. For a moment, Grant wanted to pretend the night had been nothing more than a terrible incident they had survived. He wanted to tell Tessa to sleep, go to school in the morning, forget the CEO, the attackers, the ghost protocol, the blood on his shirt. But when he saw his daughter sit at the kitchen table and reopen the security files she had copied before the police sealed the system, he knew pretending was no longer an option. "Tessa," he said quietly, "you need rest." She did not look up. "So do you." Her fingers moved across the keyboard, reflecting pale blue light across her tired face. Grant saw Mira in that concentration in the way Tessa leaned toward a problem, as if the whole world disappeared when a pattern began forming. It hurt and comforted him at the same time. "This isn't your fight," he said. Tessa finally looked at him, and the fear he expected to see was there, but so was something stronger. "It became our fight the second they used a system no one else noticed. If I found the ghost protocol, whoever built it can probably find me too." Grant had no answer for that. The next morning, Adrianne Vale sent a secure car to collect them for a meeting at Helios DataWorks. Grant almost refused when he saw the black sedan outside their building. It looked like a line being crossed, a visible sign that his life was shifting toward a world of power, corporate enemies, armed guards, and secrets buried under layers of wealth. But then he noticed a gray SUV parked half a block away. Its engine was running, though no one got out. The driver's face was hidden by the sun visor. Grant's body went still. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a delivery driver waiting for a call. But combat had taught him that maybe was where dead men made mistakes. He guided Tessa into the sedan and kept his eyes on the SUV until it disappeared in the rearview mirror. Helios Dataworks rose 50 stories above the financial district, all clean glass and cold precision, a building designed to suggest that no secret could enter without permission. Inside Adrianne's office was less extravagant than Grant expected. There were no gold statues, no ridiculous displays of power, only technical books, whiteboards covered in diagrams, and 3 monitors filled with scrolling data. Adrianne herself looked different in daylight. The emerald gown was gone, replaced by a charcoal suit and pulled-back hair. She looked tired, but not broken. Beside her stood Orrin Blake, his expression tight with embarrassment, and Marlo Sen, Helios's chief information security officer, a silver-haired woman with eyes sharp enough to cut through excuses. "Mr. Mercer," Adrianne said Tessa, "thank you for coming." Grant did not sit. "Before we talk about anything else, I need to know whether anyone followed us here." Orrin straightened. "Our transport was secure." "That's not what I asked." The room cooled by several degrees. Adrianne studied him, then turned to Orrin. "Check it." Orrin left without another word, and Grant saw the first crack in Adrianne's polished authority. She was used to being obeyed, but she was also smart enough to recognize when pride could get people killed. Marlo invited Tessa to connect her laptop to the conference display. Within minutes, the ghost protocol appeared on the wall as a maze of code, timestamps, and access paths. Tessa's voice steadied as she explained that the system had not been breached once, but slowly shaped over 3 weeks. Someone had tested camera delays, adjusted door logs, and created invisible movement windows across the venue. Marlo's expression changed from professional curiosity to genuine alarm. "This is not a criminal improvising," she said. "This is infrastructure mapping." Adrianne's jaw tightened. For one public attack, Grant crossed his arms. Maybe the attack was never just about killing you. Maybe it was about proving they could reach you anywhere, even in a room full of your own people. That landed harder than he expected. Adrianne looked toward the window the city spread beneath her as if it belonged to her, and for the first time Grant saw what power could not protect. It could build towers, hire guards, encrypt data, and still leave a person alone in the exact second danger arrived. Then Tessa found the next piece. She cross-referenced the code signature with older incidents around Harbor Row and discovered 11 small breaches in 6 months' traffic cameras, parking systems, hotel access panels, emergency radio repeaters. Each incident had been dismissed as minor. Together, they formed a map around Glasshaven Hall. Whoever planned the attack had studied not only Adrianne, but the environment around her, the response routes, the blind spots, the habits of every system meant to protect her. Orrin returned with worse news. The gray SUV Grant noticed had appeared near their apartment twice in the past week, captured by a street camera that had gone offline for several hours the night before the gala. Tessa's face went pale. Grant felt something cold and savage move through him. He could handle men coming for him. He had accepted that kind of danger years ago. But his daughter had been watched outside their home, and that changed everything. Adrianne stepped closer, her voice lower now. "Grant, I can move you both into a secure residence inside this building until we identify them." His first instinct was to reject the offer. Depending on Adrianne meant stepping deeper into her war. It meant surrendering the fragile, normal life he had built after Mira died. It meant admitting he could no longer protect Tessa by keeping the world small. But the world was no longer small. It had followed them home. "Dad," Tessa said softly, "we can't solve this from our kitchen table." Grant looked at her, and the decision broke something in him that had been locked for 5 years. Since Mira's death, he had believed safety meant distance. Keep people out. Keep routines simple. Never owe the powerful anything. Never invite danger closer than necessary. But danger had arrived anyway, and distance had not stopped it. Maybe protection did not mean hiding from the fight. Maybe it meant choosing the ground before the enemy chose it for him. "All right," he said at last. "We move here temporarily, but Tessa stays behind secured floors and nobody uses her like an asset." Adrianne nodded. "Agreed. And we stop reacting," Grant continued. "No more waiting for whoever this is to make the next move. We trace the money, the uniforms, the access, the contractor who touched that system. Professionals leave trails because every operation costs something." Marlowe's eyes sharpened with approval. "That means financial records, vendor chains, private security groups." Tessa turned back to her screen, fear giving way to focus. "And code signatures. Whoever wrote this has habits. Everyone does." Adrianne looked around the room at the unlikely team forming before her. A widowed veteran in a borrowed suit, a teenage girl with a dangerous gift, a humbled security chief, and a cyber expert who suddenly understood they were facing something larger than a single attack. "Then we begin now," she said. But as Grant watched Tessa dive into the data, he knew the hardest part of the decision was not moving into Helios or helping Adrianne. It was accepting that his daughter was no longer a child he could simply shield from every storm. She was part of the fight because her mind had seen the enemy first. And somewhere beyond the glass walls of the tower, the people who had watched them for weeks were learning the same thing. Grant Mercer began the next morning with the kind of silence that meant he had already made up his mind. He no longer moved like a man hired for temporary security. He moved like a soldier building a defense before the first shot was fired. The secure residence Helios provided for him and Tessa sat on the 32nd floor of the company tower, a polished apartment with reinforced doors, tinted windows, and more digital locks than Grant had owned in his entire life. It should have felt safe, but safety had never been about walls to him. Safety was information preparation and knowing where the enemy would step before they arrived. While Tessa slept for 2 restless hours on the couch, still wearing the hoodie she had pulled over her gala dress, Grant stood at the window and watched the city below. Somewhere beyond the morning traffic, beyond the shining offices and ordinary people buying coffee, someone had paid professionals to murder Adrianne Vale in public. Someone had watched Grant's home. Someone knew Tessa existed. That last thought burned hotter than anything else. He had stepped into danger many times when he was young, but back then he had been responsible for trained men who understood the price of a mission. Now the person at risk was his daughter, a girl who still forgot to eat when she was coding, who still kept one of Mira's old sweaters folded beneath her pillow, who still looked at him like he could stop anything bad from reaching her. Grant knew the truth. He could not stop everything, but he could make the people coming for them regret choosing his family. By 8 o'clock, the conference room on the 48th floor had become a war room. Adrianne stood at the head of the table in a white blouse and dark trousers, her hair tied back, her expression stripped of all gala elegance. Orrin Blake had pinned printed building maps to a glass wall, marking entrances, stairwells, blind spots, and emergency routes with red and black tabs. Marlowe Sen had opened 3 secure terminals and was feeding Tessa controlled access to Helios databases, public financial records, vendor registries, and breach reports from across the city. Ronan Price arrived shortly after carrying a thin leather folder and the calm expression of a man who was used to finding rot beneath expensive surfaces. Grant did not like him at first. Ronan's suit was too perfect, his smile too measured, his eyes too quick. But when Ronan listened to Tessa explain the Ghost Protocol without interrupting or talking down to her, Grant decided to give him a chance. "Every operation has a spine," Ronan said, placing documents on the table. "Money, access, manpower, timing. We break one vertebra, the rest starts to bend." Grant nodded. "Then we start with access. Those uniforms were real, not costumes. Someone got them from the vendor or from the venue itself." Orrin's jaw tightened. "I already contacted the catering company. Their inventory records show no missing uniforms." "Then their records are lying," Grant said. Adrianne looked at Orrin. "Pull the vendor chain. Every employee, every subcontractor, every temp agency used in the last 2 months. Orrin left to make the calls, and Grant turned to the venue maps. He studied the route the attackers had taken from the service entrance to the ballroom, replaying the movement again and again in his mind. They had not improvised when the bar distraction happened. They had counted on it. That meant the distraction team might still be unidentified. It also meant someone inside Glasshaven Hall had known exactly when Adrianne would stand beneath the chandelier and how far her guards would be from her. Meanwhile, Tessa and Marlowe worked through code, their voices low and rapid, the language of intrusion paths and encryption keys, turning the room into something Grant could not fully understand, but could still respect. Tessa found the first major break just before noon. The Ghost Protocol had communicated with a relay server masked through ordinary traffic from a maintenance contractor. The contractor had serviced not only Glasshaven Hall, but also 3 buildings near Harbor Row, where the earlier minor security incidents had occurred. "That cannot be coincidence," Marlowe said, leaning closer to the screen. "It is not," Tessa replied. "The same credentials were used in every system, but the contractor probably didn't know. Someone stole or purchased their access." Ronan's phone buzzed. He stepped out, returned 5 minutes later, and dropped a printed financial summary in front of Adrianne. A shell company called North Star Holdings transferred $2 million 3 weeks ago to Vantage Black Security. Adrianne's face went still. "Private military." "Officially risk consulting," Ronan said. "Unofficially hired force. Former special operations intelligence contractors. People who know how to disappear after doing ugly work." Grant reached for the paper and read the names connected to Vantage Black. A few were unfamiliar. One made his shoulders stiffen. He had heard rumors about men like that overseas, men who wore no flag and answered only to the highest bidder. "The 4 at the Gala," he asked. Ronan nodded. "At least 3 have historic connections to Vantage Black." The room seemed to shrink around them. Adrianne walked to the window, looking down at the city her company helped protect. "Who owns North Star?" Tessa was already typing. "That is the ugly part. North Star sits under 6 layers of companies' trusts and offshore accounts. But one of the linked trusts uses the maiden name of a woman married to Lucian Graves." The name changed the air. Marlowe looked up sharply. Adrianne turned from the window. Even Ronan stopped moving. Grant noticed everything. "Who is Lucian Graves?" Adrianne's answer came cold and controlled. "Former CFO of Silverline Bank. 2 years ago, I testified before Congress about security failures in the financial sector. Silverline had ignored breach warnings for years and hidden losses from regulators. After my testimony, the bank collapsed. 3 executives went to prison. Graves vanished before he could be arrested, along with money investigators never recovered." Grant understood then. "A man who lost his empire, his reputation, and his freedom because of you." Adrianne's eyes did not blink. "Because of his crimes. That does not mean he sees it that way." No one argued. By afternoon, Ronan had located a coastal property called Seacliff Manor, purchased 18 months earlier through another shell company tied to the same financial network. It sat 60 miles north of the city behind stone walls, forest cover, private security gates, and its own dock. Grant studied the satellite images on the conference display, his mind automatically measuring approach routes and defensive positions. "If Graves is there, he is not alone," he said. "A man with that much stolen money buys guards before he buys art." Adrianne wanted to call Detective Mara Keene immediately, but Ronan warned that Graves still had friends in law enforcement and financial regulation. If they moved too soon and word leaked, Graves would vanish again. It was the first time Adrianne looked truly trapped. She was used to acting decisively, to pushing through opposition with intelligence and pressure. But this enemy lived in shadows, and shadows punished impatience. Grant watched her wrestle with the decision and saw not weakness, but a woman learning that control was not the same thing as command. "We verify first," he said. "Ronan puts eyes on Seacliff. Marlowe and Tessa keep tracing the money. Orrin hardens your security. I review every routine you have and break the predictable ones. Adrianne looked at him. And if Graves moves before we are ready? Grant's answer was quiet. Then we make sure we are harder to hit than he expects. For the next 48 hours, Grant changed the shape of Adrianne's life. Her morning gym walk was canceled. Her lunch rotation was replaced with unpredictable secure deliveries. Her driver routes changed daily. Her elevator access was restricted. Every meeting was screened twice. He knew she hated it not because she was careless, but because every precaution reminded her that someone else had invaded her choices. Yet she followed his instructions, and that respect unsettled him more than resistance would have. Tessa worked beside Marlowe almost non-stop, and each hour made Grant more aware that his daughter was stepping into a world too large for childhood. She was brilliant, useful, necessary, and that terrified him. On the second night, as Grant tried to convince her to sleep, she showed him a pattern of hidden transactions moving from the Silverline accounts into newer Vantage Black channels. Graves is not just hiding, she said. He is preparing something. Before Grant could answer, Ronan called from the surveillance team near Seacliff Manor. His voice was stripped of calm. We have movement. Multiple heat signatures inside the main house. Armed guards. And Grant. 2 vehicles just left the property heading south. A second call came in almost immediately from Detective Keene. 2 of the Gala attackers had been released on emergency bail by lawyers no one had expected, and both had disappeared within 30 minutes. Grant felt the old battlefield instinct snap into place. The enemy was not waiting anymore. Adrianne entered the room, saw his face, and understood before he spoke. Tessa's fingers froze above the keyboard. Grant looked at the maps, the financial trails, the photographs of Seacliff Manor, and finally at his daughter. The investigation had worked. They had found the spine of the operation. But now the operation was turning its teeth toward them. Lock down the building, Grant said. Wake Oren, call Marlowe. Nobody moves alone. Adrianne stepped closer. You think Graves is coming? Grant checked the magazine of the non-lethal sidearm Helios had issued him and slid it into place. No, he said, his voice low. I think he is already on his way. The warning arrived before the enemy did, but only by minutes. Grant Mercer moved through the 48th floor of Helios DataWorks with the cold precision of a man who had spent half his life preparing for moments everyone else prayed would never come. The building went into lockdown under Adrianne Vale's command, steel shutters sealing secondary entrances, elevators freezing between secured floors, guards taking positions at access points that had once seemed decorative and now looked painfully fragile. Tessa sat in the operations room beside Marlowe Sen, her face pale in the glow of 4 monitors tracking street cameras, traffic signals, and fragments of encrypted chatter that flickered across the dark web like sparks before a fire. Adrianne stood near the conference table, no longer pretending this was a business crisis. Her company, her people, and the strangers who had saved her life were all inside the same tower, and somewhere below Lucien Graves was turning years of hatred into action. Grant checked every door, every stairwell, every emergency route Oren Blake had marked on the glass wall, but his mind kept returning to one unbearable fact. His daughter was no longer behind him. She was beside him, part of the defense, part of the solution, and no order he gave could make her unseen again. For 5 years after Mira died, Grant had believed love meant building walls. He had kept his world small, kept friendships shallow, kept danger at arm's length, because he thought if he controlled enough details, he could prevent another loss. But watching Tessa move through encrypted systems with the same fierce intelligence her mother once carried, he began to understand the terrible truth. Protecting someone did not mean locking away their gifts. It meant standing close enough to catch them if the cost became too heavy. At 3:17 a.m., the first breach alarm sounded from the east service entrance. 6 armed men forced their way through the loading level dressed in tactical black, moving with the same disciplined speed Grant had seen at the Gala. Oren's voice crackled over the radio, calm but strained, reporting contact and calling for police backup. Seconds later, Tessa stiffened. "Dad," she said, "there's another team." Grant turned. "Where?" Her fingers flew over the keyboard. "Not here. They split. One unit is at Helios, but another signal just pinged near Monroe Tower, Adrianne's apartment." The room went silent. Adrianne's face tightened as the meaning landed. Graves had expected them to scatter. He wanted Grant torn between protecting Adrianne and protecting Tessa. He wanted Adrianne isolated, frightened, and available for capture. For one brutal second, Grant saw the trap exactly as Graves had designed it. If he stayed at Helios, Adrianne's residence could be breached. If he left, Tessa and Marlowe might be exposed. If he tried to protect everyone separately, Graves would win through division. Adrianne looked at him, and in her eyes he saw not command, but trust. "We consolidate," Grant said. "Nobody goes back to Monroe. If Graves wants your biometrics, he has to come here. We move to the executive safe room now." Adrianne nodded without hesitation. That more than anything told Grant how much had changed. The woman who had once trusted systems protocols and paid professionals now trusted the man who had bled on a ballroom floor for her. They moved as a tight unit, Grant leading Adrianne close behind him, Tessa between Marlowe and Orrin, two guards covering the rear. The stairwell smelled of concrete and emergency dust. Somewhere far below, a muffled burst of gunfire echoed upward, followed by Orrin swearing into his radio and ordering the lobby team to fall back to the second perimeter. Tessa flinched, but she did not stop moving. Grant wanted to take her hand the way he had when she was little crossing streets after school, but she was holding a tablet now guiding them through the building's changing security grid. They reached Adrianne's office just as the main lights cut out. For a moment, darkness swallowed the glass walls and polished furniture. Then emergency lighting bathed the floor in red, turning the office into a battlefield. Adrianne opened the hidden safe room behind a bookshelf with a retinal scan and thumbprint. The door slid back to reveal reinforced walls, independent communications air supply, and enough equipment to survive a siege. "Inside," Grant ordered. Tessa hesitated. "Dad, inside." His voice broke harder than he intended, and he softened it with a hand on her shoulder. "You can fight from there. I need you alive more than I need you brave." Tessa looked at him, and for a moment she was not the genius who had cracked ghost protocols or traced mercenary money. She was his child, terrified, and trying not to show it. "You come back," she whispered. "Always." He lied because fathers sometimes had to make promises they could only hope the world allowed them to keep. Adrianne paused at the threshold. "Grant, don't do this alone." "I'm not." Orrin stepped beside him, service weapon raised, guilt and determination carved into his face. "I failed you once," he told Adrianne. "Not again." The safe room sealed and Grant heard the heavy lock engage. He and Orrin had less than 3 minutes to turn Adrianne's office into a choke point. They overturned a conference table, shifted a cabinet near the entrance, and positioned themselves where the attackers would have to enter narrow and blind. Grant carried only a stun baton, pepper spray, and his own body. It was not enough, but it would have to become enough. When the stairwell door burst open, the fight came fast and ugly. Grant struck the first man in the wrist, heard the weapon clatter away, and drove him into the wall. Orrin fired controlled shots that forced 2 others back, but the attackers kept pushing, disciplined and relentless. A fist slammed into Grant's ribs where the Gala bruise had barely begun to heal. Pain flashed white, but he used it, turning into the attacker and dropping him with a knee strike. Another man caught him from behind. Grant threw his weight backward, smashing them both into Adrianne's desk. Glass shattered. Papers flew. The room became noise, impact, breath, and survival. Then Orrin went down with a hard blow to the temple. Grant turned toward him, and that half-second cost him. 2 attackers pinned him to the floor, zip ties cutting into his wrists before he could break free. He fought until a boot pressed between his shoulders and a pistol touched the back of his head. Footsteps entered the office slow and satisfied. Lucien Graves appeared in the red emergency light, thinner and harder than the polished executive photos Tessa had found his face, sharpened by exile and obsession. "Where is she?" he asked. Grant said nothing. Graves smiled as if silence amused him. He raised a tablet and Grant's blood went cold. On the screen was the inside of the safe room, Adrianne standing protectively in front of Tessa and Marlowe. "Technology is only as loyal as the person who maintains it," Graves said. "I had a contractor install access months ago. Miss Vale built a fortress and invited my eyes inside. He ordered his men to cut through the door. Sparks erupted from a torch, spraying across the office like burning rain. Grant pulled against the restraints until plastic tore skin from his wrists. He had been trained to endure pain, but helplessness was different. Helplessness was seeing his daughter trapped behind a door while another man decided how much her life was worth. Then the lights came back on. Full power surged through the floor, clean and bright. The torch died. Elevator locks engaged. Steel shutters slammed somewhere in the distance. Tessa's voice filled the intercom, shaking but triumphant. "Mr. Graves, you should not have opened a back door into my safe room." "Back doors work both ways." Graves froze. "I have your father," he snapped. "Open the door or I kill him." Silence followed, so painful Grant could hear his own heartbeat. Then Tessa spoke again, softer now. Dad Grant forced his voice steady. "I'm okay, Tess. Don't open it." "Dad, I can't." "Yes, you can. You listen to me. You keep that door closed. You finish what you started." Adrian's voice broke through next, fierce and emotional. "Lucian, take me and let him go." Graves laughed, "Still bargaining like you are in control." He pressed the pistol to Grant's temple and demanded access money and safe passage. But while he threatened, Tessa worked. She routed the safe room feed to Detective Mara Keene, uploaded Graves' financial trail, and locked every exit around his team. When Graves activated an electromagnetic device to fry the locks, Tessa had already rerouted the backup generators to shield the floor. The device sparked and died in his hand. For the first time, Lucian Graves looked afraid. Sirens rose below, then boots thundered in the stairwell. Grant waited for death and thought not of medals or battlefields, but of Mira's laugh. Tessa's first day of school and Adrianne's hand on his arm when she had trusted him to hold the door. The office exploded with a flashbang. SWAT poured in. Grant threw himself sideways as Graves tried to use him as a shield. Shouts, gunfire, and bodies hit the floor in a blur of disciplined violence. When it ended, Graves was handcuffed, Oren was alive, and the safe room door opened. Tessa ran to Grant before anyone could stop her, throwing her arms around him as officers cut the zip ties from his bleeding wrists. "You saved us," he whispered into her hair. "No," she cried. "You stayed." Adrianne emerged slowly, her composure cracked at last. She looked at Grant, at Tessa, at the destroyed office, and the weight of what her world had cost them finally reached her. By sunrise, Lucian Graves was in federal custody, his accounts frozen, his hired men arrested, and Helios surrounded by police tape. But victory did not feel clean. Oren blamed himself for the breach. Adrianne apologized until her voice nearly failed. Grant sat with bandaged wrists and bruised ribs, realizing that the fight had changed him more deeply than any wound. He had trusted Tessa not because he had no choice, but because she had earned that trust. He had let Adrianne into the space he had guarded since Mira died, not as a replacement, but as someone worth risking hope for. When Adrianne asked what happened next, Grant looked at his exhausted daughter, then at the woman whose life had become entangled with theirs through danger and courage. Next, he said quietly, "We heal, then we rebuild. But this time, nobody does it alone." For 3 weeks after Lucian Graves was taken away in handcuffs, the city tried to turn Grant Mercer's life into a headline. Reporters called him the veteran father who saved a billionaire CEO, the quiet security guard who stopped a corporate assassination, the widower who walked into danger because no one else noticed it coming. Tessa became an even brighter story. A 15-year-old girl who cracked a ghost protocol trapped a fugitive financier and helped federal agents recover millions in stolen funds. Adrianne Vale stood before cameras outside Helios DataWorks and thanked them both with a calm voice, but Grant could see the exhaustion behind her eyes. Victory had not made her feel powerful. It had shown her how easily power could become a cage. Lucian's arrest answered many questions. He had paid Vantage Black security through North Star Holdings. He had used stolen Silverline money to fund the Gala attack. He had wanted Adrianne's biometric access to steal Helios's quantum security algorithms. But one question continued to bother Tessa. Why had some of the most recent encrypted commands not matched Lucian's style? The code was cleaner, colder, and older, as if someone else had built the road long before Lucian drove on it. Grant wanted Tessa to rest. Adrianne wanted to believe the worst was over. Even Marlo Sen admitted they needed more evidence before accusing anyone beyond Graves. So life settled into a fragile rhythm. Grant accepted Adrianne's offer to lead her personal security division, but he insisted on doing it his way. Fewer appearances, stronger human checks, less blind faith in expensive systems. Tessa returned to school part-time while consulting with Marlo under strict limits Grant could live with, though he still watched the elevator doors too long whenever she left his sight. Adrianne began visiting their new secure apartment near Helios, first to review security decisions, then for dinner, then sometimes for no reason she could explain except that it felt easier to breathe around them. One evening, while Tessa argued cheerfully with Marlo over a new scholarship program for gifted students, Adrianne stood beside Grant at the kitchen window and admitted she had spent years building a company people feared, trusted, and depended on. Yet she had forgotten how to let anyone simply care about her. Grant almost made a joke to avoid the tenderness of the moment, but instead he said Mira had once told him survival was not the same as living. Adrianne did not touch him, not then, but the silence between them changed. It became warm instead of guarded. Then on a cold November morning, the illusion of peace shattered. Tessa burst into Grant's office at Helios with her laptop clutched to her chest, face pale. She had found new Vantage Black chatter on a dark server, but the target files were not old. They showed Adrianne leaving Helios the previous evening, Tessa entering her school, Grant buying coffee, Marlo walking to a parking garage. Every photograph had been taken after Lucian was already in custody. Before Grant could call Adrianne, her assistant reported that Adrianne had left for a meeting at the Horizon Foundation and never arrived. A video arrived seconds later from an unknown number. Adrianne sat bound to a chair in an abandoned shipyard warehouse, frightened but unbroken. A distorted voice said Lucian Graves had been nothing more than a failed contractor, an angry man useful because his hatred made him predictable. The real clients still wanted Helios's master encryption keys, and Grant had 4 hours to deliver them alone. If he brought police, Adrianne would die. If he brought fake keys, she would die slowly. Grant watched the video once, then again, memorizing every sound behind the voice. Gulls, metal chains, a foghorn, water slapping against old concrete. "Iron Harbor," he said. Tessa nodded, already moving. Marlo prepared a false encryption drive layered with tracking code, while Tessa opened a hidden channel to Detective Mara Keene and Orrin Blake. Grant wanted to leave Tessa behind completely, but she met his eyes and said, "You trusted me in the safe room. Trust me now." That was the moment Grant realized his transformation was not finished. Loving Tessa did not mean carrying every danger alone. Loving her meant allowing her courage to stand beside his, even when it terrified him. At Iron Harbor Shipyard, the sky hung low and gray above rusted cranes and empty warehouses. Grant entered through the main door with the fake drive in his hand and found Adrianne tied beneath a broken skylight. Before he could reach her, a slow clap echoed from the shadows. The woman who stepped into view was not Lucian's widow, not a mercenary commander, not a stranger from Adrianne's past. It was Daphne Cross, the newest member of Helios's board, the investor who had smiled politely at meetings and asked harmless questions about system scalability. Now she wore tactical black beneath a long coat, and her eyes held no emotion at all. Daphne explained everything with the calm pride of someone unveiling a perfect machine. Lucien had blamed Adrianne for destroying Silverline, but Daphne's organization had used that anger. They pushed him toward the Gala attack, allowed him to expose himself, and watched Helios tighten around the wrong threat. While Adrianne, Grant, Tessa, and federal agents focused on Lucien, Daphne had positioned herself inside the company, studied internal defenses, and prepared to steal the technology that could destroy a global underground market built on insecurity. For years, corporations, corrupt officials, criminal syndicates, and private intelligence brokers had paid Daphne's network to exploit weaknesses in financial systems. Helios's quantum security platform would close too many doors. Adrianne had not merely made enemies, she had threatened an entire economy of fear. Daphne offered Grant a choice: hand over the real keys and walk away with Tessa, or watch Adrianne die for a principle no one would remember in a year. Grant looked at Adrianne. Her face was bruised, her wrists bound, but her eyes told him not to trade the safety of millions for her life. In that look, Grant saw the woman beneath the CEO title, not invincible, not untouchable, but brave enough to lose everything rather than let evil grow stronger through her surrender. Grant placed the drive on the floor. Daphne smiled, thinking he had broken. Then Tessa's voice came through the warehouse speakers, clear and fierce. "You really should check files before you brag about being patient." The drive activated, flooding Daphne's system with Marlowe's tracking code and broadcasting every confession she had just made to Detective Keene's command channel. Daphne lunged for Adrianne, but Grant was already moving. The fight that followed was not clean or heroic. It was brutal, desperate, and human. Daphne's men opened fire from the catwalks. Oren's team breached from the west doors. Police lights flashed through broken windows. Grant tackled Daphne before she could drag Adrianne behind cover, and the two crashed across the concrete. Daphne fought like a trained operator, fast and vicious, driving a blade toward his ribs. Grant caught her wrist with both hands, pain tearing through his bandaged cuts from the Helios siege. For 1 second, he nearly failed. Then Adrianne, still tied to the chair, shifted her weight and kicked Daphne's knee with everything she had left. It was enough. Grant disarmed Daphne and pinned her until Detective Keene's officers swarmed in. When the shooting stopped, Daphne Cross was on the floor in cuffs, her network exposed, her boardroom mask destroyed. Adrianne was freed, trembling so hard she could barely stand. Grant expected her to collapse into relief, but she stepped into his arms with a quiet certainty that made the whole ruined warehouse disappear. "I thought I was protecting the world by never needing anyone," she whispered. "I was wrong." Grant held her carefully, as if admitting what she had become to him might still break something fragile. So was I. Months later, Helios launched the Mercer initiative, a STEM foundation for young people who saw patterns others missed but lacked the support to follow them. Tessa helped design it, refusing to let anyone call her a prodigy in the brochures because, as she said, kids are not products. Oren rebuilt Adrianne's security culture from the ground up. Marlowe became Tessa's fiercest mentor, and Detective Keene's investigation dismantled Daphne's network across 3 continents. Grant remained at Helios, but he no longer lived like a man waiting for loss. Adrianne became part of his and Tessa's life, slowly and honestly. Dinners, long walks, arguments over safety protocols, laughter in a kitchen that once held only grief. On a spring evening, the 3 of them stood on Adrianne's sailboat beneath a sky turning gold over the harbor. Tessa raised a bottle of soda and toasted the family we choose when life scares us into telling the truth. Grant looked at his daughter, then at Adrianne, and felt Mira's memory not as pain, but as blessing. He had changed. He had learned that love was not a weakness enemies could use against him. Love was the reason he stood back up. Family was not only what survived tragedy, sometimes it was what waited on the other side of courage. And as the boat drifted into calm water, Grant finally understood that he had not saved Adrianne alone. Tessa and Adrianne had saved him too.